In this podcast, we'll be covering the career track in specific venture capitalism, right? Which is again like a very hot field right now in the market. Everybody wants to be a VC out there. A lot of consulting exits end up being VCs, right? And we have a very special guest. In fact, he's a bit seen, Mr. Anirudh Garg, currently working as an associate at Speciale Invest, which is again like a deep tech investment firm. Right. Welcome to the podcast, Anirudh. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks, Rudhir. Good to be here.
Right. So I think, Anirudh, being a VC, you probably get to ask this question to a lot of founders, but today I'd like to take the liberty of, probably asking you this question. Can you give us a brief introduction about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So I graduated from BITS Pilani campus, did my chemical engineering. I graduated in 2019. Post that, got a job offer from Flipkart as a business analyst, worked there for about 7 months, was working on multiple things ranging from pricing to planning to inventory intelligence. Then wanted to do something more horizontal, preferably work with early stage companies. Didn't really have an idea of my own, so thought I'll probably help others who have ideas get capital and build their companies out. So then I joined an early stage venture capital fund called Speciale Invest. So it's been around 1.5 years for me at the fund. So I started as an analyst, currently working as an associate at the fund.
Right. Amazing. And what was the duration for your tenure at Flipkart?
So it was pretty small. I worked there for about 7 months, and post that I started working with Speciale.
Okay. All right. Amazing. So, I mean, just like another question that popped up in my mind. So, you got placed at Flipkart as a business analyst, right? And now you then switched on to being an investment analyst, and now I think an associate at the firm, right? So, how are the two roles exactly different? Because I think VCs specifically don't come for campus recruitments, but Flipkart is again like a popular company, right? So, I mean, what sort of difference in your day-to-day roles do you observe in both the companies when you work? I mean, in the given roles that you're allotted.
Right. So I think just from a work front, probably we'll cover it much deeply during the podcast. But I think from a very personal note, I think Flipkart was a 200 people organization. You had big teams, you had multiple people that you could chill with or go out with. But I think VC as a business is very small and lean. So, for example, our team is currently 6 members and we have 2 offices. So it's like 3 people at every office and we hardly get to meet each other. And it's a lot of individual work, whereas I think Flipkart was more team driven and it was a team effort. So yeah, that's probably the bigger difference.
Right. I think that also like probably increases the amount of ownership of work that you're able to take up, let's say at Speciale as compared to, I mean, what you had maybe at Flipkart, if I'm not wrong.
Correct. So I think when I joined Flipkart, it was post the Walmart acquisition. So a lot of processes were already in place. Teams were super large. There was a lot of compliance, etc. So it was very difficult for someone just starting up to probably do something which is not defined and which is very different. So I think the impact was a little lower. Whereas in VC, you have all the responsibilities. It's like an open field. You can pretty much do anything and everything you want to do. So the more you ask for work, the more you contribute. I think you end up getting more and more work, and then you start contributing more. So I think it's very self-driven, whereas Flipkart was a little much organized, I would say.
Right. Understood. VC in general is considered to be like a very hot field, right? A lot of people want into, I mean, a lot of people want to break into early stage VC firms, or I mean, a lot of people after their consulting careers that want to get into VCs, right? So, what's the buzz really about? I mean, what do you do as a venture capitalist? I mean, why does everyone want to get into VC, right? And I think if you can probably just talk about your experience of VC, that too, in the light of, let's say, the kind of work that you've done at Speciale, I think that will be like a great thing for our viewers.
Got it. Okay, so I think VCs in general are people who manage external money. So as a venture capital fund, you probably raise money from people who want to diversify their assets. So let's say I am an HNI, I want to invest money in something other than public markets. So they can probably give money to all these venture capital fund managers. So you raise funds and then you manage this money and then you end up investing this money into startups. So I think the difference between VC and PE is basically VC invests in private companies which are relatively early on in their trajectory. Could be in terms of like seed investing, could be Series A, Series D as well. Whereas PE firms are relatively more mature and they invest
Mm-hmm.
larger checks into more traditional and mature companies. So something like a Zomato or Swiggy now would raise PE money, whereas when they started up, they raised venture capital money. So
Right.
that's the basic outline of what a venture capital firm does. Then talking
Mm-hmm.
about basic duties of what anyone at the fund does. So I think it's a very flat organization. Everyone ranging from an analyst to a partner does almost similar work. There are a
Mm-hmm.
couple of differences which I'll probably point out. I think
Okay.
the basic, or the most prominent work that anyone at an early stage venture capital fund has to do is probably sourcing companies. So you need to
Mm-hmm.
meet all these smart and young founders very early on, because I
Right.
think it's a very competitive field. There are multiple people who would like to give their money to all these smart people. So you need to constantly keep sourcing the best founders and best deals in the market. That is
Right.
one. Then I think the second part is to build diligence notes both from a company and a sector perspective. So from a sector perspective, like majorly it's a proactive activity that people do. So let's say I am super
Mm-hmm.
excited about hydrogen as a fuel. So I'll probably form a thesis on it. I'll try to outline certain types of business models that are good or probably might gain traction in the next couple of years. So this is more
Right.
of a top-down proactive effort that you make to understand the sectors deeply and to build like a knowledge base for your own self and the fund. Then obviously on a day-to-day basis, you meet a couple of founders and you end up doing diligence on them. So you spend talking to these founders, making notes, trying to understand if this business model makes sense or not. Then the
Mm-hmm.
kind of financial plan that they have given is feasible or not. How is the team? How is the product? How is the market? So that's basically forming like a diligence note on companies itself.
Right.
So again, every fund has a different style of working and a strategy. So if you work
Mm-hmm.
for a more top-down fund, then you end up doing a lot of proactive thesis building. Whereas if you work for a relatively early stage or a more agnostic fund, then you do a lot of bottoms up diligence where you meet the founder, then form an opinion on the sector and the team, right? And once
Right.
you made an investment, then I think you spend a significant amount of time, specifically in early stages, to build out a portfolio companies and help them scale. So I think
Mm-hmm.
you can essentially help your founder cohort, or I would say your portfolio companies, on multiple things. One is definitely hiring, because all of these people are building their teams, so help them build the right set of team. Then you help them
Right.
with go to market strategy, with pricing, with planning the next couple of months and quarters to help
Mm-hmm.
them launch the product, do basic research for them. Then
Right.
also, since most of these founders are constantly raising money, so they need a lot of help on the fundraising side. So you help them
Mm-hmm.
work on the decks, help them connect to people in your network, help them connect to relevant customers if you have any in your network. So I think you end up working on a lot of strategic points with all your founder companies. Then I think there's a fourth bucket which is not really prevalent at early stages of your career. It's majorly for partners. So that's fundraising. So once you have a good enough network, you've been into the industry for let's say a decade. So you end up helping on the fundraising side. So you need to have like a well built out network with let's say HNIs, high
Right.
net individuals, or like institutions, or let's say family offices. So you spend a good amount of time every 4 years to raise this capital so that you can then go out and invest this money into startups. So I think
Right.
a mix of all these four activities happens depending on the kind of fund and the stage at which you currently are.
Hmm. Right. Right. Understood. Very interesting work,
Yeah.
Anirudh. In fact, I mean, Speciale happens to be like a sector-specific firm, right? I mean, they invest in deep tech as well as SaaS, right? I mean, but your
Yeah.
background, I mean, I think you come from chemical engineering, right? If I'm not wrong. So how do you, I
Correct.
mean, how do you develop this perspective, right? I mean, so many things happening in deep tech in terms of AI coming up, and I think you recently funded E-plane company, right? So
Yeah.
electric mobility plus now merged with aerial mobility, right? So I mean, how do you go about learning all of this, right? I mean, how do you, I mean, select companies without actually having probably like a subject knowledge backed up from your college?
Right. Well, it's a very interesting question. I think luckily your engineering background helps you with multiple things, specifically working for deep tech fund. So I think to just give you like
Mm-hmm.
a quick background about my fund, we typically invest in two key verticals. One is your
Mm-hmm.
software companies, could be in any sector, and next is your hardware companies. And we also started looking at some other emerging sectors which are more science driven.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the three kind of companies we invest in. So I think at every fund, be it like a consumer fund or a deep tech fund, you need to be a generalist because you can't do, let's say, more than two deals in every sector. So you need to have a macro view on multiple things. Obviously,
Right.
there's a lot of bottoms up learning that needs to happen. So I think the
Mm-hmm.
two key major skill sets that has helped me over the last 1 year is definitely being curious about technology. So I think
Okay.
if you love technology, if you love building technology, learning about them, then I think you'll do
Mm-hmm.
really well in any tech fund. So you need to break down stuff. You need to understand the basics of it. So it's very bottoms up, but I would say it's not super difficult given that all of us come from an engineering background. So we have some sort of a base when it comes to technology. And for example, I am a chemical engineer. So if I evaluate something on the hydrogen side or let's say battery technology or
Right.
food technology, I think that background really helps. But obviously, you can't really have specialization and depth in every sector. So you need to be more of a generalist and break down stuff, be curious about technologies. So I would say it's a very iterative process. You keep talking to a lot of founders, and I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
beauty of venture capital, that you are being paid to talk to the smartest people in their fields. They come spend 30 minutes of their time with you and just
Right.
enlighten you with every knowledge that they have about the sector, and then you learn. Then you brainstorm with multiple people, form an opinion, and then probably take a decision if you like the company or not. So I would say it's very iterative and it's an ongoing process. You can't really build depth in more than a couple of sectors. So being a
Mm-hmm.
generalist and like being a basic problem solver always helps.
Let's move on a little bit about how can one actually look at entering this field, right? So I mean, we do understand
Hmm.
that VCs are, I mean, they're extremely, or at least the way the narrative goes, that they're extremely tough fields to actually get into, right? And they hire very selectively. I mean, they have very focus metrics. Your profile should be very stellar, right? So let's just talk about two different sets of people, right? Let's say one, a student, right, who's right now, let's say, starting in a tier one college, like most of the Bitsians are, right? Given the fact that a
Hmm.
lot of Bitsians nowadays, in fact, a lot of IITians nowadays are, interning at these VC firms. And then let's say, there are people like you, right, who sort of went into a good firm, and from there, you actually exited to a VC role, right? So, keeping these
Yeah.
two different personas in mind, how do you think that, these two people can enter, or at least try to enter or interact with the entire VC ecosystem?
Right. So I think if I talk about the last couple of years since the time when I have started observing the startup ecosystem in general, so I think things have
Mm-hmm.
changed and moved very fast. Obviously, let's say 2 to 3 years earlier, I mean, there were not so many venture capital funds. There were only, let's say, 10 VC funds who had significant capital and they were investing. And
Right.
majority of their partners came from, let's say, a consulting background, right?
Hmm.
So I think that was
Right.
also a trend. While they were hiring, they were looking for people who've done, let's say, a couple of years with McKinsey, BCG, Bain, and then wanted to enter the VC world. But now I think things have significantly changed given that the startup ecosystem in general has matured. There are so
Hmm.
many numbers of founders who are coming out every year.
Right.
And similarly, I think the people who've raised money to run a venture capital fund has also increased. So I think the number of possibilities for anyone who wants to come into this field has increased. And also, I think
Mm-hmm.
the bias for consultants is going down. So if you see the
Okay.
next generation of analysts or associates who are being hired, and even if you talk to other funds and
Mm-hmm.
recruiters across funds, so all of them are now looking for people who come from a startup background or who've been founders or who come from a product background or
Right.
who've done, let's say, business analyst type of roles in mid stage or growth stage startups, right? Because I
Mm-hmm.
think a couple of things have changed over the last couple of years. One is definitely since the number of entrepreneurs are growing, so it's
Mm-hmm.
now like an access game more than I would say a diligence focused game. So you need to meet these founders early on so that you can invest the right kind of capital into them at the right time,
Right.
at the right valuation, right? So I think
Right.
having like a network access personally and having like a personal brand is super important now. So someone who's coming from all these growth stage startups or early stage startups then adds a lot of value on that aspect that he knows the startup ecosystem really well. He has friends at other startups, and when these people go out and start their own businesses, they'll approach them first. So I think that gives you an access if you've already spent significant amount of time in this ecosystem, understanding what the key players here, how the
Right.
functioning happens, both from a fundraising perspective and a company building perspective. So I would say that is the reason that there is no one conventional path now. obviously there is again there's still a bias towards people who come from consulting, because consulting gives you that macro perspective on a lot of things. It's again like a very horizontal field, and working with all these top consulting firms gives you that kind of perspective of like it gives you like a good flavor of a client facing role plus a more horizontal job role, right? So
Right.
I would say again, but it's changing frequently. It's changing very fast, and I think a lot of new fields and people with diverse backgrounds are more welcome than ever.
Right, amazing. I think if I'm not wrong, probably I don't know whether it's right to put it this way. So let's say initially there used to be
Mhm.
like these big companies, right? And then let's say a lot of startups came in and disrupted the way you perceived conventional CEOs. Uh, I think it's probably right to say that now we are seeing a similar change even with VC firms, right? That let's say initially all VC firms used to be like those top-notch firms wherein you have all the consulting exits and people from all the good post-grad colleges. But now I think I've even
Yeah,
seen very early stage, I mean, even people during their college raising funds from their alumni, right, and then establishing their own VC firms, right, through whatever little bit experience they have, or probably if they can tap onto the college audience early on who are building startups, right, because they have better access to, let's say, all these people. So yeah, I think you're definitely right in the fact that, let's say, a lot of changes are taking place, and in fact that is why we are recording this podcast with you to make sure that people who are interested in something like this can actually venture into VC early on, or can probably plan a better career path for themselves. Right.
absolutely. I think one point I would love to
Hmm.
add here that
Hmm.
all the partners, let's say at all the top funds, they don't really have like a natural network with all these younger folks who are starting up, right? So, for
Hmm.
example, even at Bits, I know like a couple of my juniors who are now starting up, and they're super young.
Right.
They started up when they were in college, right? So you can't
Right.
really have access to all these people if you're a partner and you've been into the industry for 20 years. It's difficult for you to reach out to these people, right?
True.
So I think that's also a reason that a lot of good funds have started hiring people with less experience, because they're more connected to all these college audience and they're connected to people who are just
Hmm.
starting out. So like early on, if you see like 5 years back, I think it was very top heavy. Every fund was super top heavy. They had partners, they had principals, they had VPs, but hardly any of them hired analysts. And even the analysts that they hired had 4 to 5 years of work experience. So this is
Hmm.
also significantly changing because people need access to these younger folks, and they need more people who can be on ground and who are connected to these people who are starting up from IITs, BITS, good colleges from DU, IIMs, etc. Right? So
Right.
you need to be out there because the number of good founders are growing, but also the number of good funds are growing. So I think it's super
Hmm.
heavy on the access side, and you need to be on the ground, and you need more people with that kind of access. Yeah.
Based on the conversation that we've had, I'm getting an idea that BCs are a lot about how you network with people, right? I think if I rightly put it in
Hmm.
words, I think it's you know uh, more than being like a capital based business, it's more of a people based business, right? In terms of who you interact with, what you learn from people, the kind of people that you're actually funding, right? So I think that network part becomes really important, right? And probably even to actually start building that network, you need to have, let's say, like a very strong brand, right, in terms of why people would want to associate with you, right? That's why probably we see like a lot of VC firms producing a lot of good content, right, a lot of food for thought that people would like to consume. So I think
Yeah.
since these qualities are very important, say even in a VC, as a student, how do you think one can probably emphasize on networking, or let's say personal branding, right, so that maybe people can build that sort of network for themselves very early on, right, and probably can get exposed to a lot of this at a very early stage.
Right. So I think just a small correction there. When we
Hmm.
say it's very network heavy or access heavy, I think this is true for like seed, Series A, and Series B kind of venture capital funds. When you go for growth capital, then I think the skill
Hmm.
set that you need is a little different. You need to be super savvy with finance skills. You need to be more of a diligence person than probably a sourcing person. So I think it
Right.
also changes with stage, but obviously having like a network access helps at every stage, because let's say not for
Hmm.
sourcing, but you can use your network for making a couple of customer introductions for your portfolio companies or help them hire better. So I think network
Right.
is always a plus, but I think it's more important at an early stage, because their majority of these people are building stuff in stealth. So they won't reach out to you.
Hmm.
You need to be visible to them. You need to be there so that they can approach you. Whereas when you
Mm-hmm.
talk about a Series B funded companies, everything is majority of the stuff is already in the news. So if you can access good databases, then you'll end up finding these companies. But it gets a little tough and tricky when it comes to early stage companies, and specifically pre-seed seed, where I think it's again super invisible in terms of what is happening. So it's, yeah. But I think coming to your other question about how can like what can you do better when once you are in college. So I would say a couple of things. I think over time what I've realized is the network that you have ends up being more helpful if you build like long term relationships instead of like
Mm-hmm.
transactional relationships. So I would say you shouldn't just network for the sake of networking. You should meet people and spend time with people that genuinely interests you and you think you can connect to. So unnecessarily networking does not make sense,
Mm-hmm.
at least to me, right? So
Okay.
that's
Okay.
one thing. Obviously, if I think the core of venture capital or startup ecosystem in general is definitely love for technology, love for new companies, and building companies from day zero. So I think
Mm-hmm.
if you have that kind of drive, then you should obviously spend time working with all these early stage founders or mid stage
Mm-hmm.
founders while you are in college, because that helps you give and build a perspective on a lot of things. One is definitely if you like this kind of a risky environment because things are not structured when you work for an early stage company. So you need to be a hustler. You need to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations and tricky situations. So I think you can
Okay.
explore that once you are while you are in college and work with all these startups. I think all these early stage founders are more than willing to have younger folks on the team as interns. So I would say reach out to the founders you like in the sectors you like and talk to them, speak to them, work with them, understand the sector, understand how these people think, and then try to see if venture capital makes sense for you. And I think being
Right.
involved with college activities always helps. It helps you um, get perspective on things other than work, because I think venture capital in general is a very observation based business, more on the B2C side specifically. I
Mm-hmm.
typically do a lot of enterprise stuff, so I think observation there makes a little less sense, given that you can't really observe how an enterprise behaves until you've built a company yourself, right? But when it comes to B2C
Right.
companies or internet companies, something like a Swiggy or a Flipkart, you need to have customer insights and audience insights, which I mean, it's a habit which is being developed while you are in college or even after college. So you need to be a good observer of things, talk to multiple people, different types of people, not only people you uh, have some connection with, but also people from diverse fields, people from let's say commerce or people from humanities. So we should talk to them and build perspective, observe things, so that that gives you like a larger idea of how people function, how things function. And obviously, if you lead certain clubs and departments during your college time, I think that gives you an inherent network within your department or club, and also it gives you that leadership skill that you need while you're helping your founders build that company. So just a basic
Right.
understanding of how human psychology works, how people function, how people respond to different situations, that will help you be like a better founder or a better investor.
Mm-hmm.
So I think yeah, these will be some of the like tangible and intangible things I can think of.
Right. Right. Definitely. Definitely, Anirudh. Totally agree with you and totally resonate with you on those points. In fact, Anirudh, I mean, I probably had like one question specifically for you, and I think a lot of people, other people like you, who break into VC very early on, right? I mean, if you conventionally consider VC, given that probably people get into VC after a lot of experience, so it's probably for them like an exit option out of, let's say, a well-spent career as an entrepreneur, or let's say probably
Hmm.
after a good stint at a consulting firm, right? But since you ventured into VC very early on, so how's the growth trajectory like? I mean, you went in from being an analyst to an associate, right? But you're very early on, I mean, in your career itself, right? I mean, there's still probably like
Yeah.
20 to 25 years to 30 years for you to go, right? So I mean, how does the career path look like for a VC, and especially for a person, let's say, who's there very early on in this ecosystem?
Yeah. Okay. So I think again now things are changing. Now VC is not an exit option to let's say a consulting or an early
Mm-hmm.
stage company. I think it's becoming more of a choice that people take very early on in their life cycle. So I think
Okay.
again, as I said, if 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 you love startups, if you love building teams, then I think VC is a very obvious choice for you. So I would say again, you need to understand if you want to start up a company or if you want to be an investor early on. So I think for me specifically, since I didn't really have an idea of my own, but I wanted to build companies. I loved this startup ecosystem. So I think VC
Mm-hmm.
was the most obvious choice for me. But I think if
Mm-hmm.
you have a team, if you have an idea, then I think starting up is also like a great option, given that there's a lot of liquidity in the market right now, and fundraising is not very difficult if you have like a good team, if you have like a good product. So I would say,
Mm-hmm.
again, when you're planning the VC career, it's not very streamlined. So I've seen people starting up after spending like 4 to 5 years of time in VC, because when you're working as a
Mm-hmm.
VC, you get insights into multiple sectors. You meet people from the startup ecosystem who are as risk taking as you, and then you gel with some people, you vibe with them, and then you end up starting a company with them. So I think that
Right.
is a very common route that people take, that you exit as a founder. Then I think I've
Mm-hmm.
also seen people spending 10, 15 years of their life in one fund and then growing to a partner. So that is also like a very lucrative choice for people now, because I think
Mm-hmm.
people like start the VC ecosystem in general is super rewarding. So if you work well and if you're able to show a significant impact for the fund, then I think it's super rewarding. You can be on a partner track and be a partner at the fund in, let's say, 6 to 7 years of time, right? And I think some people also end up working for core teams or early stage startups. So let's say someone
Okay.
who's worked with a VC for, let's say, a couple of years, then ends up taking an operator role in their own portfolio company. Again, so if you don't really
Mm-hmm.
have an idea of your own, but you still want to get your hands dirty, build a company, be an operator, then you can go out and be a core team member in one of your portfolio companies, lead strategy, lead growth, or lead a particular vertical and help the company grow. So I think there are multiple ways, but I would say once you come into the VC ecosystem, then generally like 95% of the times I've seen people being in the startup ecosystem itself, either as an operator or
Mm-hmm.
as an investor, right? So I've hardly seen people exit the startup ecosystem once they've come to a VC fund or even been at a startup.
Right, right. Interesting. So I think I see like a lot of. I think it's like a bilateral route, right? I mean, you can either enter in like a VC firm after you worked in a startup, and probably from a VC firm maybe you can exit into a better startup, right? So I think yeah, I mean that gives like a very good perspective as to the kind of openings that VC has in store for you. I mean, if you choose to enter into VC at very early on, right? Fair enough, Anirudh.
Yeah.
Um, right. All right. Let's just take like a small break. Do something a little fun, right? So that probably our audience can maybe engage and relate with you a little better, right? So let's do like
Sure.
a quick rapid fire round, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to answer in one word, and then you can give like an explanation as to why you chose the answer that you did. All right.
Got
So
it.
let's first, just like break the ice a little. Go back to your early Vitsian days, right?
Hmm.
So what used to be your favorite hangout spot on campus?
I think we particularly used to hang out a lot in our college room itself. So all of us in
Okay.
one room, 15 people in one room. So I would say college room or hostel room.
College room or hostel room, right? So were you one of those people, who used to interact a lot with their wing people? I mean, was that the case, or were you like an outgoing person? I mean, how was it?
So I think I had a very close group of friends that I used to hang out with.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say again, I wasn't really like a very outgoing person, but I had like 10, 15 people that I used to hang out with very often. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, fair enough. All right. Given a choice, would you want to be, let's say, a venture capitalist or a startup founder?
Hmm. I think it's a very tricky question. I think again depends on the phase of life you are in. So currently, I love venture capitals. I would say I would love to be here for some time, and then probably I
Mm-hmm.
think your thinking changes every year. So I might love building my own company someday. But currently, I would say VC looks super interesting and comfortable to me.
Right. All right. Fair enough. And all right. So let's say barring Special Invest, another VC firm that you have great respect for, that you'd probably want to work
Yeah.
with or associate with. Let's say any one name that comes to your mind.
Any VC fund?
Yeah, that you feel is it's barring Special Invest. Any one VC fund that you think is really doing great in India, and probably like a VC fund that you would want to work
Hmm.
with or associate with in due course of time.
Got it. So I think Axel Partners is like an amazing fund. So they've
Mm-hmm.
backed companies like Flipkart very early on, and they've had like a great hit ratio on both software side and consumer side. So I would say
Right.
Axel Partners is a fund that I really look forward to. Yeah.
Right. All right. Amazing. All right, Anirudh, I think that was it for the podcast. But before we close, would love to have
Yeah.
any golden words of guidance for all the people who aspire to be VCs, or in fact even people who aspire to do well in their Bitcoin's life. I mean, how would you want to guide them, or probably what is that one takeaway that you'd want to give them from your experience at Bits that will help them do something better for themselves in their later life?
Hmm. So I would say like one thing which really worked for me even while my tenure at Bits and even after that, that talk to multiple people. I think you can't really get enough perspective by reading things and just thinking things. I think it's better you talk to people who've been there, done that. So that gives you like
Mm-hmm.
a very unique perspective, and they'll also correct you if you are going wrong somewhere. And I think Bitsians, for example, like your seniors are super helpful. So even if you reach out to them over LinkedIn or an email or WhatsApp, I think they'll be more than responsive. So you should definitely reach
Right.
out to multiple people to understand how did they solve for a particular problem. That is one.
Mm-hmm.
Then I think next is like specific to VC. I would say there is no right or wrong time to come into VC. But I think having some unique perspective on some sectors always helps while you are in VC. So I would say you
Right.
shouldn't really look to enter VC just for the sake of coming into VC. So once you think you are prepared for it, then you should probably look to apply to all these venture capital funds. But I think working for early stage companies is also like a great option right now, and a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
people are now coming into VC as well. So I would say it's good to develop some perspective before coming into VC. But I think again, as I said, some people in college or even for you, like you, for example, are in VC so early on. So I would say some people are
Mm-hmm.
comfortable working in that unorganized fashion, but some people are more risk taking. So it again depends on how do you want to plan the next 10 years of your life. But I would say there's no right or wrong time to come into VC.
Right, right. All right. Amazing. Thanks a lot, Anirudh, for all the time that you gave to us. In fact, I mean, I think a lot of Bitsians would now want to reach out to you if they have any more questions remaining, right? So we'll try our best to source those questions to in a proper fashion. And I mean, I think definitely your contributions will help a lot of people make the right career choice, or at least explore, VC as one of the plausible career options. Because at least from my experience, what I've realized is that, sometimes we get very narrow-minded when it comes to the opportunities that we guys look at, right? uh, Campus placements
Correct.
happen to be the only way of getting a job for yourself, right? But I think you've really opened good avenues in
Yeah.
terms of VC being there as one of the interesting fields out there, especially for people who want to who typically want to break into non-core, if I put it that way, right? And especially
Yeah.
people who are interested a lot in startups, right? So thanks a lot,
Yeah.
Anirudh, for all the time, and wish you luck for your amazing tenure at Speciale.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. It was great speaking to you guys. And just shoot me an email or write to me on LinkedIn in case anyone has a doubt or query. Happy to answer.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Thanks a lot, Anirudh. Thank you.